Okay, yep. Says live where I'm at.
Rage of Steam is
Um,
live.
Rage of Steam is live. Episode 2, 1846.
I forgot
Are
the
we
race
live?
for the Midwest. We are live.
Okay, fantastic. I will make sure that this is off. And yeah, welcome to Rage of Steam, everybody. This is Matt. I've got Andrew with me as always. And today our guest is Adam Brocker.
Hi
Hi, Adam.
guys.
Excellent. And we are going to be talking about 1846, Race to the Midwest at some point. But we should probably kick it off with just a general what we've been playing lately.
So
So,
I'm gonna start this off mostly because I haven't been playing anything, and I'll explain that because it's beautiful weather in Arizona, and I've been spending a lot of time outside. Went to Tucson this weekend and have just been enjoying that type of thing. Although I did change up my weekly game night. We're moving it to Thursdays, and I'm going to do it at a place where I can play longer games, so we can go later into the evening. Before I was doing it at home, and we pretty much call it about 9 o'clock. Um, but now I'm going to do it someplace where we can play later. So I anticipate playing uh, longer games and that type of stuff. So that's me.
excellent. Adam, how about you?
Um, so the heaviest game we played recently was a teaching game of 1846 over at Andrew's place. We did a five-player game of that. I was the only well, one person had played I think once before, but yeah, I was basically teaching that game, which is interesting. I like doing a larger group for that. I know it's harder on the players, but it's easier on the teacher to teach once one five-player game versus like two or three different three-player games trying to coordinate that. So,
Absolutely.
um, but that was a good experience. I like teaching 1846. Because I really enjoy the game, so it's nice to kind of share that with other players. Um, Other than that, I host a monthly game night at my place. We've been doing some lighter stuff there because we've got some newer players. So played a couple of newer titles. Well, sort of newer titles. We played Snowtails, the new trick-taking game Niet, which is kind of
Okay.
interesting. You're selecting sort of the criteria for the game at the start, which was pretty cool. Got schooled at that because I was playing with a couple brothers, and they kind of they would like look at each other and they'd be like, "Oh, they're talking when they shouldn't be talking." But okay, that's fine.
Collusion.
So yeah, I got schooled at that pretty good, and then closed out the night with St. Petersburg, which was pretty awesome.
Awesome. Very cool. Do you like trick-taking games?
Somewhat. I like them for sort of lighter stuff. I used to play a lot of euchre um,
Okay.
when I was in college and stuff. And I still like the game, but it feels a lot. There's less decisions in it, so you're just kind of. It's nice just to kind of sit and chat and play. But some of the newer ones, Niet was pretty fun because it changes up. Every game you got a different different set of criteria. Each trick is worth a certain different amounts. Like they've got a negative tricks and stuff like that. So that was pretty cool. The new one from I think it's North Star Clubs is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
It's really nice to start off a game night because you can set it up real easy. Just kind of you're just playing tricks and it scales from 3 to 6 perfectly. So you just as people arrive, you just deal them in and just keep playing, and it's a good time.
Excellent. Very cool. Um, yeah. Well, I've been playing a lot of stuff lately because we just had our local convention, Con of the North, here, not this weekend, but last weekend. And Lance, the Undead Viking, he hosts an open board gaming room for that convention. So there are like scheduled games and stuff, but a lot of us just hang out in the open gaming room for 3 days pretty much and play board games. And our buddy Nicholas came into town for that, and Nicholas brought like 8 or so clamshells of Winsome train games, and we did our best to play a lot of them, and that was a lot of fun. I actually kicked the convention off with teaching The Last Spike to some people, which is a light train game from Columbia, and one that I really liked. Came out last year. Super fun game, kind of like Acquire, but with a train theme.
Nice.
I'd recommend it, especially if you like kind of like lighter games and family games. Sometimes, like I think it's a really good one. But yeah, other than that, let me check my list. We played Age of Steam, of course. Have to. And actually, that was Nicholas's first game of Age of Steam, so that was good. I'm doing good work making people play Age of Steam. Colorado Midland, Kansas Pacific, Northern Pacific, Texas and Pacific, Trans-Siberian Railroad, and Rail USA. Lots of good stuff there. The Pacific games are measurably different, in case you're wondering.
Which one did you like best?
Kansas Pacific. Well, I liked Kansas Pacific better than Texas and Pacific. Both games have this cool going west mechanic where you can essentially like make your train company expire at a certain point of the game. It helps control the clock of the game, and it also makes sure that no one else can buy into it. You just sort of freeze it by going west. And I really thought Kansas Pacific was more fun, though they're both good. Northern Pacific. Sorry,
was
what?
Was this is it the Queen version of Kansas
The Queen
Pacific?
Games version, yeah. So Kansas Pacific should be out there. It shouldn't be as hard to get a copy of as some of the other, as the original Winsome edition. But I haven't seen Kansas Pacific around a whole lot yet.
I picked it up at BGG Con.
Oh, did you?
But I just haven't played it yet. Yeah, I picked it up, but
I dig it for sure. I thought it was a lot of fun. It's interesting because once you start a company, you get to pick whether that company issues more shares or not. Unlike some of the other Winsome games where you can force a share auction whenever.
Sure.
In Kansas Pacific, as a president, you sort of get to decide whether you want to dilute the share value. Unless you're doing too well, then Wall Street forces you to auction a share during a certain phase, which
As
is
they always.
yes. The investors, they want a piece of your pie.
Yes.
And then, have you guys ever played Northern Pacific? It's real different. It's almost like an abstract, like a multiplayer abstract, where you have you can only do one of two things. You can either lay a cube of your color down in one of the cities along the map, or you can move the train along. And the thing is, if the train passes through a city with cubes on it, you get to take back your cube that you laid and as well as an additional cube. And you just keep making these decisions until the train goes from Minneapolis to Seattle. And whoever has the most cubes, whoever essentially invested the best in a very abstract way is the winner. It is a super cool game, and one I highly recommend the 15-20 minutes of your life it will take you to play that one.
And when did that? What year did that come out?
Northern Pacific. I will double check, but I think it was within the last 5 years.
Is it a newer one?
2013. So it was in the 2013 set.
Cool.
Yeah.
I've liked any Winsome I play, but it's just so rare that I get the chance to get them up to the table. Every time I do, I'm glad that I did.
Right. Yep. I face the same issue sometimes, which is why it was so nice to have Nicholas come and friends Dave and Tanya and my wife were all like had equal enthusiasm to play these. I know.
It's also nice to have somebody who collects them all, right? Like who
right. Well, even though I've got
a
half a dozen titles, they're not always easy to get played. I like the guys that I play 18xx with regularly would just almost always prefer to play 18xx and not Winsome.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And then I'll shut up soon, I promise. But yeah, my last personal triumph is I got some people at the first Minnesota game night to play Transib with me. Also from Winsome Games. Very different though. In Transib, the game occurs on the Trans-Siberian Railroad, but you're actually controlling competing groups of Russian businessmen who are attempting to sell their wares along the Trans-Siberian Railway. And you can put protection markers on other people's stuff, and you can attack each other, but everything's resolved with blind bidding of money instead of bullets or dice or anything like that. So, and then whoever has the most money at the end wins, so you can make weird decisions like deciding to essentially like sacrifice your own guys for cash at some point. It's very bluffy, like, I don't know, it's a super fun game, so I'd say well worth. Oh, and it looks terrible, like even for a Winsome game it looks like really bad, really gross. So I might have to make a deluxe copy so I can lure more people into playing it.
Sure. Was that the that's a lot of train gaming.
That's a lot of train gaming. Yeah, absolutely. But no 18xx besides online stuff this month, so we played some non-train games as well. Oh, I got a chance to play Steamrollers too. I don't know if you played that one.
I've played it two-player and didn't care for it at all, two-player, but I've heard that four-player solves some of that. So
I played four-player, so.
Did you like it?
I did. Yeah, it's neat. You know, if you want to play a shorter Age of Steam with drawing and dice rolling, Steamroller is probably the game for you.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the concept, and I picked it up at in Essen, and my buddy and I hadn't played it, so we broke it out, and it didn't work. You're just rolling dice back and forth, and we just didn't care for it. I mean, we ended up stopped playing. But like I said, I could see where it would work better for more people because you're passing the, you know, and some of the mechanisms and stuff. It just didn't work.
Yeah, definitely. I think you need to have more competition for dice, more competition for cubes, and the opportunity to steal those special action cards from each other. Like, you want all that, I think.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, having more people in that mix would have, you know, I think solved those issues. So I didn't like say, oh well, this is a horrible game. I just, you know, it just didn't work for two. So
2 is not ideal.
Not ideal.
Yeah, I'll buy that.
Yeah. So today we are talking about 1846, and we've brought Adam on. You've said this is one of your favorite 18xx games, Adam, or?
Yeah, it's either it's top 2 games entirely. I really enjoy it. I haven't played it probably as much as there are. I mean, there are people out there that have played it, 100 times.
Sure.
I've made it to the double digits, but that's as far as I've gotten so far.
And how did you get into the 18xx? Is it a hobby or is it an addiction?
A little bit of both, I guess. I don't know.
Lifestyle, man.
Lifestyle. There you
go. I actually saw when I first started out in the hobby. Scott Nicholson was still doing his Board Games with Scott videos, and he did one on 18xx. So I saw that, and that really piqued my interest. He did a really good intro to that. Kind of gives you the general layout. And I was at that point kind of looking for things heavier. Started kind of getting interested in things like Through the Ages and sort of the heavier Euro stuff. So at that point, I started kind of trying to figure out how to try it out because nobody in my group played 18xx, nobody knew anything about it, so it was sort of me and one other guy had some interest. So we actually planned a trip. We were going to Gen Con that year, so we planned a couple of games there. We got into we scheduled a learning game at the TGA at Gen Con. The Train Gaming Association does just several different 1830 teaching events there, which are really fantastic. They basically have somebody there that just sits with the group, guides you through it, sitting with a bunch of newer players and just kind of learn it, which was fantastic. Along with that, there's if you happen to be in Ohio, There's a group in Columbus, the Cabs group. They provide the board games for the Origins board game room. There's a good group of 18xxers there who are real friendly, and they're just very welcoming. I showed up at a meetup before Gen Con because I was curious if I could get a game in, and one of the guys there is just like, "You want to play 18xx? Let's go!" So it was cool. He pulled out a 18mex, which was nice. It was just kind of lighter side of things, and just kind of went through it. So we did that. I played on. There's actually an old software, a DOS game, 1830, that's available on Abandonia or something like that. It's fairly good for just getting familiar with the mechanisms and getting used to that. If you don't want to feel all the pressure to try to just kind of get more familiar with it, it allows you to do that sort of on your own. You're kind of playing with. I mean, it's not a full experience, but at least gets you used to and comfortable with the mechanisms. And you can play several different games of that and just kind of get familiar and get crushed over and over and over and over. Get used to that. Yeah, that was pretty much my thing. I actually the guy I went with was an older gentleman, and he pretty much, we played the learning game, and that was it. That's all he was doing for the convention, was playing at XX from that point forward. So he was in the TGA section that whole con, and like every con since then that's what he was doing. So he was he was an avid 18xxer. So
now, did you notice that? Do people do the training game, the learning it, and then do they either love it or hate it, and do they walk away and say, I'm never playing that again, or are they like, wow, that's me, that's what I'm going to be?
The people I played with, I think they I didn't see as many getting bit by the bug, I guess. They were all kind of, oh, that was interesting, kind of stuff, but it wasn't. I don't know. I didn't see anybody there. I mean, there were definitely a lot of people there that were very into the hobby, but I didn't see that transition in our game.
They're like, I've done that. I can.
Yeah. I mean, I personally have seen when I've taught it in the past, I've kind of learned from that, but if you're not teaching it to the right group of people, you will get a very vehement negative reaction.
Oh yeah.
If you try to sell them on something that's not if they're not fully prepared for what they're getting into.
Sure. And so, how did the both of you find 1846? Tell me the story of first coming across 1846 and.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, go ahead, Adam.
No, you first. I got to think about it actually.
So I'm pretty sure. Yeah, 1846 for me, it must have been listening to the Longview episode about 18xx with Eric Brocious and Joe Huber were on that, and they had mentioned the game, and I think that they said something to the effect of like, you should just order it from Deep Thought because it will take a long time to get your copy.
Do it now. And
then you can think about it in the meantime, whether you're prepared to commit to buying a copy of 1846. And so I put in an order immediately. I'm still waiting on that.
Still waiting, and that was 42 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Probably 3-4 years ago, something like that. I don't know. It's been a while. And then I had some friends invited me to play, and it was playing 18xx, and it was 1846, and it was actually the first live 18xx game I had played. So that was where I first encountered 1846.
And Adam?
It was.
Cool. I think it was one of the ones that we played while we were out at Gen Con.
Okay.
But I think from that, I was looking for shorter games because that was what I felt was the limiting factor. Was a lot of the XX games are 4 to 6 hours, and people just don't want to invest the time. So I was looking for a shorter XX, and this was by far one of the best shorter XX games that I encountered, because it has that depth and that replayability.
And what's the history of the game? When did it come out?
Got that. I think maybe. No, I have the rules next to me, but it doesn't say when it came out. In the 2000s, though, right? I think.
Unfortunately, I don't know. I know some of the details on it, but I don't know necessarily the dates.
Right. So what details do you know?
2005.
2005. There you go.
Yep.
This was Tom Lehman's third XX title. He'd done 2038, and then he started work on a different game, actually, 1834. And that game actually has not been published yet. It's sat at 90%, so they're hoping for that to get completed. But from the development of 1834, he was looking for a simpler, sort of a more streamlined XX title. So he started work on 1836, or 1846. And he actually, I mean, he hasn't published 34, so yeah, that was sort of the impetus of it, anyways.
And so who's doing 34, and why isn't it out?
I just think, I don't know if anybody owns it yet. Anyone has rights to publish it yet. It's been.
He's just.
Yeah, he's given out he's done playtesting. I think it's like almost there, but I mean, because it's Tom Lehman, he's a busy guy. So trying to find time for, I mean, what is a niche game? I mean, you're not going to sell more than 500 copies of it, even if you get it out there. Well, maybe on the basis of 1846, that might have a larger sale these days. But yeah, I mean, doing Race for the Galaxy and Roll for the Galaxy and what is it, Pharaoh the Favorite.
Favor of the
Pharaohs. Yeah, I mean, trying to fit that in, I imagine, would be tough to do, because I mean, I imagine development of an XX title is got to be pretty intense.
It's just a labor of love.
Yeah, it looks like it is sort of in Deep Thought's hands, but unpublished, and the forums are just filled with like 2011 question mark, 2012 question mark. So yeah, must just be still developing, right?
Yeah, I think everyone's hoping that if 46 is successful, that they'll push to get 34 completed.
Yeah, I have all sorts of wish lists for, if GMT is successful with 46, what Matt would like GMT to do next. I have plenty of suggestions.
So GMT's doing a reprint. It has, I looked it up today, and it has 925 orders.
That's awesome. I didn't know it had gone up that high. It was in the 700s last time I looked.
Yeah, it's been basically, I don't know how they categorize it, but it's been moved into the art, and it's past the thing, and it's going to art and development, and that's as much as I know about GMT's system.
Well, they said July, right? Is the target for actually getting copies in hand? So summer sounds like.
Yeah,
I think everyone's just holding their breath to see kind of how the art development goes on that project.
Right. I can't wait to see some details as far as that goes. But it sounds like, it sounds like they're not doing anything radically different.
Yeah, I don't think that's their model, is it? I mean, they don't. I think it's probably going to be very close to what it is, right? I mean.
Yeah, I was looking through, and it definitely had some markers that it was going to be a truer adaptation of it. I mean, they're talking about not touching any of the rules. It's going to be, as the game as is now. I think the production quality might be a little different than Deep Thought, just because it's different facilities. So yeah, I'm hopeful for that. I think you guys are probably right. I think it's probably going to be very similar, and just maybe a little updated, but with the similar streamlined artwork.
Well, in
But
the
yeah,
sense that Deep Thought is pretty much all handmade, and then GMT, I'm guessing they do some. They're more on the mass end, right? They're doing their own for the war games. They do their own shit. Like some of it's machine made, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You get die cut counters and that kind of thing,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But I don't think they spend a whole
Wooden pieces sometimes, very
Yeah.
exciting stuff.
occasionally. I don't think they spend a lot of time.
Oh, and a mounted board. That'd be the other thing,
Yeah.
too. Like a real bound mounted board, it sounds like, is the way they're going to do it. So it won't be a paper map or a phone core board like you might get from Deep Thought. So
we can get the mounted maps now from Deep Thought.
Oh, can you?
Yeah, they've started that process. I don't know if all of the subsidiaries can do that as well, but I know that they've moved into that, having the mounted boards.
Cool.
And has GMT have they done any other 18xx or train games? I mean,
Santa Fe Rails.
Okay.
Very way back in
back
the GMT catalog. Yep. But
early on.
Other than that, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good mesh, considering that the audience is probably similar to war games, and you got to think, even back in the day, Avalon Hill was the original publisher of 1830,
right?
Which is, I'm just hoping that they kind of they keep it simple. That's all I'm hoping for.
But my concern is that well, this went well, but it's also a lighter 18xx game. Like, does that help the sales, or is it just because we are so interconnected now with the internet and we can spread the word that it's basically just kind of viral marketing as far as that, or are people thinking this is the 18xx game for me because it is lighter?
So that's a question I get a lot, and Adam will probably have you address this. But so my main group is filled with huge GMT fans, and they are curious about this game, and they keep asking me, like, is this a good entry point to the system?
Sure.
And right now, for me, before this happened, I used to say, like, yeah, I mean, it's fine, but I think 1830, the short game, or 1889 is a perfectly, that's actually my favorite entry into the system. When people ask me to teach them, I teach them 1889 for the most part, because it's also shorter. Having said that, with the P500 available and the price point that this game is available for, I feel like just on the strength of that, I'm like, yes, absolutely, this is a great entry point because you're only going to have to spend $50, $60 on a game. Fantastic. Give it a shot. Adam, what do you find makes 1846 a good starting game for people who haven't played 18xx before?
So I think it's more accessible for war gamers. I would probably say 1830 or 1889 would be a better bet because it's a lot more confrontational. It's a lot more direct interaction. There's a lot more to the game, so they might acclimate to it better. At least that's what I've heard. But for heavier Euro gamers and of that ilk, which is kind of where I came from, I think it just has an easier barrier to entry. So like and we'll kind of touch on some of this, but the lack of the auction for private companies is a big one. Because going into it, typically you just have no idea. I mean, you're pretty much just say, okay, what should I bid for this? What should this go for? And you're relying on everyone else at the table. Whereas with the private company draft, you can still make mistakes in there, but it's not like an auction where you bankrupt yourself before the game even starts.
Right. I find that not only the valuation of private companies in a game like 1830 or 1889 is tricky for new players, but honestly, just the mechanism of how that cascading auction works can be tricky to explain to people. And you definitely have new players essentially plug on the auction before maybe a more experienced player would, where they, and then people are ended up getting like really good companies at like face value, which is not something you want to see necessarily. But yeah, I think that makes a really good point. Is that drafting? Can you remind me, in 1846, you can sell your private companies to a public company later in the game for extra money, or
no? That's the other thing is it's limited to $1 to face value, so you're not going to get more out of that private. Like in 1830, I know it's up to twice. So you can start a company in 1830, you sell off the that private for twice what you paid for it. You get the full capitalization out of it, and then you can be off starting another company almost right out of the gate, which is fine. I mean, you just don't let that happen. I mean, experienced players will not let that happen, but if you're playing with novices, it's tempting to do something like that if you're the only experienced player at the table. Just got to not do that. But
this is how Adam wins all the games he plays. He's the only experienced person at the table. So.
That is a great strategy. I'm employing that heavily in my favor in PAX Premier right now. I just teach people the basics and then do whatever I can to beat them. It works great. So I would think the other thing that really helps with new players is the way that the stock market movement works in 1846, where it's not quite as punishing as something like an 1830 market.
Yeah, absolutely. The linear market for newer players is just less stuff going on, as well as if you're not planning for things early on and you let your valuation drop. There's a sort of a catch-up mechanism in there where it's going to jump 2 or 3 times depending. So if you make that mistake earlier on, you haven't pretty much blown it for the game because you've let your what should have been your company that you were pushing into the upper echelons of the stock valuation. You just neglected that for whatever reason.
Sure.
But in 46, you get those double and triple jumps, and there will be differences in the valuations at the end of the game, but they won't be as significant as something like 1830.
Very cool. And then, beyond that, just the fact that you can... you said your guys' last learning game, 46, was like 4.5 hours or something like that? Is that right? 4 or 5 hours?
Yeah. I tend to... I'm an over-explainer.
Sure.
I'm used to a lot of people in my group, not so much out here in Arizona, but I've had a lot of experiences with people getting upset with not knowing all the rules at the beginning. So I tend to over-explain games now. So it was about an hour explanation into that. I know this is sort of one of the negative factors of, and kind of one of the things we might talk about later. Sort of the pace of the game is very dependent on the players. Yeah, so we ended up calling it, and that's definitely something I would recommend for newer players, is just time boxing it, just calling it.
Sure.
Okay, we'll play for 4 or 5 hours. Wherever we are, we'll call it if we don't finish it.
And is that because people aren't pushing the trains fast enough?
Yeah, I think that's what it boils down to. Because without having experienced players there, I typically don't push the trains just because I'm not thinking about it, which then drags out the game. Because if no one's pushing the trains, then you're going to be sitting at I don't know if it's phase 1 or phase 2, but with the 2 or the 3 trains for long periods, and it's still a fun game, I think, but it's not going to end in a reasonable amount of time.
Well, and that's where you get into the that thing of the rules have been explained, but the strategy is still out there, right? Like, or the things that you do, like, hey, I can make the game go quicker if I do these things, and so a lot of it is just, and this is why I don't. That first game, I'll just do things. I really don't think about it all that much because I know that it's. But once you do that, once we did that game, it was like, oh, now I see now I see how those parts work together. But that's a lot of the like you can go over the rules, but it's and somewhat you can tell people the strategy, but until you play that, you're not going to see a lot of how those things work together.
Yeah, the a real eye-opening moment for me was in my first online game of 1889. That was actually like it was a newbie-friendly game, but the guy who knew what he was doing opened a strong company, and by the third stock round had just trashed it completely to open an even better company, and then sailed forth to like beat the pants off of us. And I was like, oh
Oh, you can
ho,
do that. Oh, okay.
that's really neat. I never would have thought about that. Like,
Yeah.
very cool. So my next question for you, Adam, would be we've talked a little bit about why 1846 is such a great choice for new players, but for those of us who have had a few games of 18xx under our belt, what do you think it brings to the table for more experienced 18xx players?
Um, I think variability. I think
Yeah.
the streamlined nature of it and the variability of the options are key to the game. That a lot of XX games are sort of, I don't know if they're necessarily scripted, but there's a lot of like you can tell what the stronger company is. You can tell which ones are going to open up early on, which ones will not get founded till later on in the game, which will be
Hmm.
secondary companies. Um, 46 has some of that, but a lot of the companies in that game are depending upon sort of the combination with the privates can be strong companies, um, along with the sheer amount of uh, parachuting with their tokens. So basically, they can start on one section of the board, and then I think there are three companies that allow you to move the token or basically set up a new home station for that token. Well, not a new home station, but another station for that company. That allows for some interesting dynamics between their companies, along with even two of the majors can parachute in. The Pennsylvania and the Baltimore and Ohio have the ability and again, it can be to their own detriment to do so, but it
Sure.
does have that. They do have that option, so it just the game is not in any shape static. One of the other facets I like is the availability to build up quickly, because you have the two token lays and you always have the two ORs. It's a very kind of quick-paced game,
Right.
comparatively. You still have some of that cooperation in there, especially early on when the companies are started, which is nice, but it's not as just utterly devastating as something like 1830, where if somebody places something poorly, you're done. You're gonna be waiting, and if they
Yeah.
block you out, if they block you out when the brown track comes out, you're just that's your game right there.
Sure.
So, but again, that's more on the new side. But I just like sort of when you're starting the game and you get dealt that initial hand of private companies, you can kind of plot your game from that point, and it's sort of looking at it fresh each time. Along with if you're playing a three or four player, there's going to be a different number of companies that are out there. Yeah,
Right. So it's
that
not like you
just
have the same set of privates every game. That's where a lot of the source of the variation comes from, right? Like
yeah, absolutely.
you shuffle them and you deal them out, and then you sort of try and figure out what's in that deck. Like,
Yeah, and even the
and
order. I mean, if you're one of the first, you still won't get an option at everything. You still have to
right,
decide from what you're dealt. Um, it's and then when you that reveal when everybody shows kind of what they've pulled from the deck and what you have, and kind of looking at that point to see what the starting capital is, and who's going to get first real option at companies, and just yeah, I'm getting excited already just talking about it. It's like, yeah, that would be pretty awesome to be playing a game right now. But the yeah, I mean that just those points in the game, just where it just opens up, especially when you've played it enough, so you can kind of see how many different options you have available to you. And even if like somebody grabs like your first choice, but you typically have like two or three different other companies, you'd be happy to get to the table.
But I do think that was the thing that slowed down the explanation of the game was, going through each of the privates and explaining um, kind of what they did and what that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That can
Yeah.
that can have a negative effect on that, on just the startup time.
Yeah, I mean, I understand it now, and I understand what it adds to it, but at the point, you're just like, this is a vital part of the game that you have to know right off the bat. Your first, the first jump into the game.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're just going to be. I mean, the nice thing is you can sort of elect to not pick by grabbing some of those the blank cards or whatever. But yeah, I mean, it's a lot to take in, especially on your first XX. I guess my counter on that would be that most of the XX titles have some sort of initial private startup. I can't really think of any that don't. Um, and all of them sort of it, the the draft I think is preferable to the auction in general. Although there are the nicer game of 1830 with the packages, I guess, um, might be easier in the sense that you would just each player would get a package and you would start.
Sure.
so the upside of it is that you're drafting the privates and you're not. So even if you don't have knowledge of what they do, then an auction is really worse than just drafting them, right?
Yeah, typically if it's not managed, you're pretty much a lot of the game was determined by that initial auction. So if you have no information going
Sure.
into it, it uh, I've heard a lot of stories where the veteran players are not as are not helping the newer players, and they get disillusioned with the game because they feel like, okay, nobody told me about this, and now I'm out of the game already.
Right.
Um, you know, it, yeah.
What don't we like about 1846?
I gotta be quiet.
Well, I gotta tell you, when I first played 1846, I had fun, but I did not become instantly enamored of it. And and this is admittedly a long time ago, before I knew much about 18XX. But when I played it the first time, there seemed to be not necessarily a reluctance, but there wasn't much focus on building a portfolio that's like cross invested with the other players, at least in the initial portion of the game. It really is a run a good company game. And at the time, my thinking was, well, if I'm just going to run my company as best as I can, I could play Age of Steam in half the time and call it good, or play 2 games of Age of Steam. I think that my thinking about it would be different now, especially when I was looking at the operational rules. I feel like there's some neat stuff going on in 46, so I'll have to get a few more plays in, and I don't doubt that I will once it comes out, the GMT version. But yes, initially I was not thrilled about it because I thought it was going to be more of a investment game, and it didn't seem to be at the time. So there you go.
Yeah, it's the funny thing is just it's different for each person. Because for me, that's kind of more what I'm looking for. I like
Sure.
just trying to run a good company. I mean, there are some shenanigans in 46, but they're nothing compared to a lot of the other XX titles. Um, and that's I guess what drew me to it more. I like that the game is more about trying to build a good company. Trying to find sort of that optimal path to combination with your privates that you drafted and trying to build it from there. The one thing that I probably dislike about 46 is the sort of the arc of the game with the second set of companies that are available. Jumping into that can often be a negative. It can often be a bad move to start a second company. There are exceptions to that. There are times where it is beneficial, but it seems at least 50-50. You're better off not starting that second company if you want to be competitive. Um,
And so we didn't even start a second company when we played. But how does that? Can you just kind of explain how that works out? How do you when
Sure.
can it happen? What?
Sure. I mean, so a second company can be founded at any point. It's basically, especially in 46, it's partial capitalization, which means all you have to do is buy 2 shares in the company, and that will start. Which means you can start it at any point. The problem, though, is trying to figure out when is a good time to do that. Because if you don't time it right, you're going to find yourself with shares that are much less valuable than anything else out on the table. Um, Other companies have already developed their track. They have their tokens in good placement. They've already, maybe tokened in Chicago and are ready to go there. So there's a point in the game where you can start it, but it's hard. It's really hard to figure out when is a good time to do so. Um, uh, yeah, because you're going to be investing your money into this company to buy typically more expensive trains. So you got to get your run set up to allow for that sort of longer train. Um, there can be good times to do that, but oftentimes it may be better if there's stock available in good companies to just to purchase purchase those shares as opposed to trying to invest in a secondary company.
Hmm. So for you, for the second, so you set up your initial company in the second half of the game. What sort of interesting decision points are you coming across? Is it about the track layout and the token placement at that point, or like controlling the speed of the train rush? What kind of stuff are you considering at that point?
Um, Sort of a combination. I mean, the initial point is just trying to get your company sort of off the ground. As it develops up, you're trying to build towards those longer runs.
Mhm.
Excuse me. The secondary portion of it, though, is typically interesting because somebody is going to start a secondary company. So trying to figure out
Okay.
how that is going to key into your lines, and sometimes it is just about starting it just for fun. You start your secondary company just to kind of see what you can do with it. Try, get it off the ground and get it going.
Is this what Adam does when he's crushing all of his newbie competition? He's like, I'm just gonna start a new company right now.
Yeah, I mean, it could just be more fun to run 2 companies, and you can try to get those 2 working together. If you can time it right early on, you might be able to do it if you have more capital than some of the other players. Get 2 companies going early on in the game. But that second half of the game it can be tough to try to figure out what you want to do going forward. A lot of times there's a lot of trying to snap up different shares in different companies, and along with that, you're just trying to figure out, okay, and it doesn't happen as much in 46, but it can happen where if you do, double down on a company, someone else's company, are they going to dump that on you? Are they going to start the second company, and then you're left holding the bag there?
Sure.
So it's, yeah, I don't know. I mean, the second that would be my one weakness in it for 46 is the second half of the game is not as dynamic as some other companies, because some other games, because you can't put yourself in a bad spot doing that. Although you can do it in other X titles, but I think the train rush is such that you're usually better off starting a second company to have that capitalization available to grab some of those
So I
larger
have this.
trains.
So if GMT comes out with this and there's 1,000 print run or more, probably they already have 925, and this becomes people's first 18xx game. Is that a good thing, or is that a bad thing?
I mean, so for me, and like Adam mentioned before, for some players, 1846 may not at the moment, be the game that gets them really excited about 18xx. But I don't think that that's a good or a bad thing. I mean, that's just a thing. I don't know. Does it matter if Agricola or like Catan as your first Euro game. I don't, I'm not saying that that's the comparison to be made between like 1830 and 46, but I think for me, just the fact that it's going to be so available is going to be good, and it's a solid game too.
Yeah. As
There are other
opposed to
games.
something, like if somebody had picked something a little less desirable and made it, widely available, and then people were
Sure.
like, oh, well, I really don't like these 18XX games.
Well, because I'm trying to. What's India 1853 that
Yeah.
Mayfair did.
Yeah,
You know,
53.
that game has been easy to come by for a long time now. Maybe it's not so much anymore, but that just really isn't the game to get people started
No.
playing 18XX. It's way too maniacally operations focused, and it's a long game too. So 46 I think is going to be a better ambassador. Would I, well, actually in 1830, that's pretty easy to come by. Again, it can be tricky because it can be long, and there are some problems with the Mayfair edition, but I don't think it's a bad thing. I think the fact that it'll be out there, people will be playing it, there'll be support for it. Those are all good things.
Yeah, the only negative thing I can think is that it's not as, because 1830 is sort of the basis of a lot of XX titles. A lot of people will use that as sort of their starting point for explaining something else. Although I think if 46 becomes the standard, if there more people have started to get familiar with it, I don't see that necessarily as difficult to explain the differences. I think once you have that background in there, because you can use other titles like Panamax or something else that uses a similar system just as a basis to say, hey, now that you know this mechanism, let's go from there. I think it's good to have the choice there. I think it's going to depend on again, people finding the right title to explain and teach the XX titles. And I think having more choice, I think, will always be better than only having one or two options to choose from.
Yeah, and I'm really curious as who the buyers are for, are they the lifelong 18XX, or are they some people starting to see this and picking them up? Are they the newbies? And then I'd be interested to see it, and GMT has such wide distribution, and it's gonna hit your local shop.
Oh, for sure.
That's gonna be really interesting. So
I think you have a mixture. So you have GMT people who are already GMT fans. I imagine that a lot of the people that the heavy cardboard guys have been reaching. So there's probably a lot of copies ordered in that guild. I'm sure of that. But I think also you do have a lot of the 18XX fans who just want to support. Maybe they already have a copy of 1846, but they're saying, hey, let's support this initiative. We'd love to see more of this. So it's going to be an interesting mix, I think.
Definitely. All right, we're coming up on an hour, but what haven't we covered? What haven't we talked about? Everybody looks at their list.
Yeah, right. We haven't talked about historical stuff, but this is something I don't understand very well. I don't know. Adam, do you know much about historical Chrome on 1846, why things are the way they are for the railroad history fans?
I read some of the stuff. It was mainly just from honestly for the 46 manual, and it was interesting kind of seeing that basis, because he did work in a lot of stuff in there that I found interesting, where he talked about sort of the stitching together of track, that there were a lot of companies that were founded that were either state founded or just laid a couple miles of track, and then they were defunct. And those companies then were sold off to other companies to sort of build up their rail lines, and I think that's integrated into the game. Some of the private companies, the Big Four, the Michigan Southern, and the Michigan Central, and I think there's one other. It's interesting, and then some of the explanations for the parachute tokens are interesting, where The B&O was based on private conversations with with investors in the area to start up, a portion of that company in since the Cincinnati area or something to that effect. And it's interesting what Lehman did to get those concepts integrated, and I think it made for a better game.
Cool. That is interesting. I know that there was a lot of that in the history of the local Minnesota railroads, where you did have small companies try and get up and running, and they got a certain amount of investor money, and they laid some track, and then the thing went kaput, but the track was still there. So then eventually you have something like the Great Northern come along and buy up, the small stuff and just continue. Of course, with a generous state grant, like any good rail baron would do. Cool.
I mean, do you like, as people who have played many of the 18xx games, do you get that sense of history out of it when you play it, or are you even playing for that? I mean,
I like that's in there. I like the feeling of it, and it's sort of, I think it adds to the theme of the game. But I'm not a avid train enthusiast. I like the ideas of it. I like the concepts.
Yeah. I can't believe this.
What?
So you vetted this guy.
I tried. I guess I need to add that question to it.
I mean, I like the theme.
I'm
I like
this eject button right here in a second.
I like the mechanics that derive from it, but I'm not necessarily an avid train history buff, I guess.
Yeah, and we talked about this last episode. I think that's why that type of why are you into it, and I think it's, you can play them without having any interest in the history, and it works fine. But I always find it interesting when people have some of the knowledge of the history and then the game, or how that compares in the other 18xx games. Like, how much history research is needed to fire up an 18xx? I mean, or is it just mechanics, or is it I want to try this with it, and so I'm going to find that time in history that fits some of the mechanics. I don't know. I'm going to guess in future episodes we're going to get into the mind of 18xx designers. But
yes, absolutely.
Do they start with the history first, or is it the mechanic, or is it the...
I think it depends. I still think, I really think the majority of them are historical nuts. Yeah. Have you been reading at all about 18CO, 18 Colorado, that was just announced? Well, that's something worth checking out on the BGG forums. Some guys just unveiled the fact that they've been cooking this 18CO design for a little while, and they're making the files available, and it's going to be a fun read to see kind of the story behind the development. So check that out for sure. And maybe an inspiration to, I know, the forthcoming 18AZ. I know you guys are
I need a designer.
One of these days you'll get us 18AZ.
Yeah, I do not have time to design 18AZ, but if you have a design, call me. We'll talk. Because I would totally play that. The Colorados would be fascinating. There's all kinds of cool stuff.
Definitely.
Especially if you work in some of the small mining. So a lot of the small gauge mining stuff that went on was really cool, because it was all about getting that stuff out of. So yeah, there's some cool stuff there.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I don't know if you guys have ever touched Silverton at all, but what a cool game that is. As far as just like the tons of historical information that built that game, like, Yeah,
well, I think there has to be. That's why I guess my question is, does it find that balance between give you enough of the historical feel? But Adam, when you're playing it, are you just specifically playing it for the game, or is it just?
I mean, part of it's the theme, part of it's the feel of building up, these train companies,
the companies.
Yeah, and building them out, and building a good, building the rails out, and developing into, especially. I mean, I'm from the Midwest, so kind of some of the cities that resonate with me a little bit.
You just can't resist a Grand Trunk Railroad, can you? Every time you see it, you're like, Grand Trunk, yes.
Well, I'm a Cincinnati guy, so we
Oh, okay. All
we
right.
tend to stay out of the Michigan area, if you know. But yeah, I mean it's definitely I like that aspect, and I think it adds something to the flavor, to the character of the game. But I mean, if that weren't there, would I not play it? I probably still would, because I think the mechanics are solid. I think the game system is an amazing one.
Very cool. Yeah, yeah. I have to say that when I was looking through it again today, I was like, oh, there's some really interesting seeming tools in that game that but the next time I play it, I will be paying extra attention to the historical stuff because I think it's neat.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so I think we're gonna wrap this up unless you guys have anything else you want to mention. No.
Play games.
Play games. So 1846 is still available pre-order from GMT, right? Is that how it works? Can somebody
Yeah,
look?
you can still list yourself on the P500. You know, your credit card doesn't get charged
Right.
until they're closer to production, so there's very little commitment on that end. I'd highly recommend people
So it's
check
not.
that
So it's
out.
not technically like a pre-order. Basically, you put your credit card in there, but they don't.
Yep.
They don't charge it until they're ready
Yep.
to ship them out. Then they.
Yep, and if you subscribe to their email newsletter, they will have updates of charging and shipping in every month, so you'll have a good idea. So if for whatever reason you decide it's not for you, you can back out before that goes off. So yep, it's there. It's still available at Deep Thought, and I believe priority copies are still available through Golden Spike Games for anybody who just cannot wait.
So
for
Golden
1846.
Spike is where you can get it much quicker than.
Yeah,
So Deep
like a
Thought is the
couple
one where
weeks.
you. Okay, a couple weeks, and then Deep Thought's one if you want to wait. I'm gonna guess his orders might drop off a bit though.
For 1846, yeah, it's pretty likely. I think I ordered a few years ago, and I'm like 700 in the queue. So, you know,
Yeah, I wouldn't hold your breath for Deep Thought. I would, if you want to get into the system, you need to just go for either Golden Spike or is it All Aboard? Is the other one?
is All Aboard doing 1846 as well?
I don't think they may not be doing 46, but just some of the other XX titles.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, anybody interested in any of the All Aboard games, they're great. Scott does a great job. So, yeah, absolutely.
And then you can find us on. We have a Twitter account at Rage of Steam, and I'm at Long Creative. As you can see, Matt doesn't have his lower.
My lower third dropped out, but
How can we catch up with you?
At the MPLS Matt on Twitter. I'm MPLS Matt on Board Game Geek. Those are good
I'm Long
places.
Creative on Board Game Geek also. And Adam, if somebody wants to get in touch with you about your hatred of Age of Steam, how would they do that?
What?
Just dropping the bomb there a little bit, huh?
We're gonna have probably have
Part
Adam.
two has to happen now.
Yep. I'm dropping the bomb there. Adam does not like Age of Steam. So.
The little cliffhanger there. Yeah, just at Adam Brocker on Twitter or A Brocker at BGG.
And then we'll probably announce. We have some things in the work, but this is just kind of we're gonna do these when we can and when it works out. But it's usually gonna be on a Sunday, and then you can always catch the episodes on the YouTube channel. And and we'll. I think we'll call it good and talk to y'all later. If you have any questions, send them to us. If you have people you want us to talk to, send them to us. If you want to come talk with us, come talk with us.
Get a hold of us. Absolutely.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks.
Take care.